With the help of an enthusiastic people and zealous curates, the Reverend McNamee began to raise funds for his project. They soon collected upwards of £10,000, half the originally estimated cost of the church. In praising the fundraisers, Monsignor McNamee perhaps offers us a clue as to why he himself wanted the Sacred Heart Church built. The Tyrone Constitution of the 9th of October 1896 quotes him as saying,
"If they were building this church merely for ornament, it would be a great ornament for Omagh. But anyone who had taken the trouble to inquire and look for himself could see that they were pent up in a very miserable church, in a very miserable locality, and through no fault of theirs. The people had no room to stand in the church. It would be seen at once that they were not making this effort through any vanity or vain aspiration, or for show. They were building this church for the honour and glory of Almighty God, and for the accommodation of those who worship there."
But despite all the fundraising activity, support for the new church was not universal amongst Drumragh parishioners. The Tyrone Constitution also states a firmly worded piece aimed at those who might question the vastness of the then current project on the church building.
"Many, however, were heard to say that a building of lesser pretensions might have served the wants of the congregation equally as well. It should be remembered, however, that Omagh is a progressive town, and that the new church is not intended merely to serve our day and generation, but will revert like a gift to posterity."
It would be safe to assume that Monsignor McNamee was of a similar persuasion. Probably the greatest benefactor of Monsignor McNamee's project was this man, Edward Boyle. Without his personal and individual endeavours, it is debatable if the Sacred Heart Church would ever have been completed, at least not to the high standard that we see today. Not only did he help in obtaining the site on which the church is built, but he personally donated at least £10,000 and probably much more to the church building funds. We know that he donated the cost of the 2 French Gothic spires and also the monstrance for use at benediction, this latter costing him some £600. It is believed that he also paid for some or all of the stained glass in the east window behind the high altar, where an inscription dedicated to him can still be seen today. And it is suspected that he also paid for some of the other stained glass as well. Edward Boyle's combined influence and contribution in practical, spiritual and advisory terms is immeasurable. Ironically, he died on the 23rd of February in 1898 at the relatively young age of 55. 1 year before the Sacred Heart Church opened. He is buried in Killyclougher Cemetery in the neighbouring parish of Kappa. This is the original sketch of what the church would look like, as drawn by the architect Mr. William Haig of Dublin, who, incidentally, died only 9 weeks before its opening. The original estimate for building costs was between £17,000 and £20,000, but during the work, additions and changes led to the final cost being in the region of £48,000. It was decided that the new church would be built on this site, at the junction of George's Street and Church Street. This map of Omagh in 1882 shows some buildings in front of a field on the spot where building was to begin. And so, in October 1892, work was started on Omagh's newest and finest church. Many people from all over the town, some with umbrellas to keep the sun's heat at bay, gathered to see the workmen begin their enormous and arduous task. This plaque high up the church wall records the blessing of the cornerstone, but it is misleading on two fronts. Firstly, the date is wrong. The blessing did not take place in 1892, but rather in 1893, nearly a year after work started. And secondly, this is not the site of the blessing. In fact, it took place here at the foot of the central front arch on the 18th of June, when a time capsule was placed in the ground containing a copy of the Derry Journal, some medals and some current coins. The ceremony was presided over by Cardinal Logue, who used this silver trowel and ceremonial mallet during the service, both of which are still carefully preserved in the church archives. Over the next 6 years, Father McNamee, along with many parishioners, continually worked on raising money to complete the building work through fairs, music recitals and bazaars. Finally, in 1898, the opening ceremony was pencilled in the diary, but had to be postponed for a year to await the delivery and installation of the seating. It is recorded that the pews, which were made from solid oak in Canada, had to be paid for up front, and it took longer than expected to raise the £700, or £5 for each pew. In the end, the money was eventually raised, and on Sunday, the 28th of May 1899, Cardinal Logue was back at the Sacred Heart to preside over 2 days of opening ceremonies. Newspapers record that an exceptionally large crowd attended all of the ceremonies and give extensive coverage to the opening of the new building. No known photographs exist that record the event, other than this one, which was taken on the day of the ceremony outside the front of the new church. In the photograph, Cardinal Logue is surrounded by visiting bishops, clergy and altar boys. The building itself was magnificent, and never more so than when it was first seen by the townsfolk of Omagh. And when the local parishioners entered the new church, they were met with a few items that they would already have been familiar with. The tabernacle in the high altar came from the Brook Street Chapel. Being relatively small in size in proportion to its current surroundings, it has a hallmarked silver door. The Pieta sculpture, too, came from the Brook Street Chapel, and when it was moved to the new church, it was damaged. For many years, the image of Jesus had 3 fingers missing. When it was moved again in 1970 to form the front piece of the freestanding altar, Monsignor Patrick McDowell, parish priest at the time, had the 3 fingers replaced. The bell, too, would have been a familiar sound, for it also came from the old Brook Street Chapel. The bell has the following inscription engraved on it: I praise the true God, I call the faithful, I gather the clergy. James Sheridan, Dublin. The bell is also stamped Erringobra. Besides the connections with the old chapel, everything else was uniquely carved, chiselled, built and polished for the new church, with many visual surprises for the visitor.